Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing another new fantasy releases wrap up, and the 3 books we'll be discussing would be The Raven Scholar, Hemlock and Silver, and Soul of Shadow. As always, I'll have timestamps in the description bar down below in case you'd like to bounce around to any one specific book or reference back to it at a future date, as well as links to the books in case you'd like to check them out for yourself. A quick heads up, I did do a more in-depth review for The Raven Scholar, so if you're interested in hearing those more in-depth thoughts, I'll also have the link to that, and if you have already watched that and you kind of have heard enough about The Raven Scholar, I'm actually going to start with this one so that if you'd like to skip ahead, you can of course feel free to do so. And on that note, we'll go ahead and jump into it with The Raven Scholar. This story is absolutely a hybrid of a lot of different things that are either prominent tropes within fantasy or they are somewhat of a mix of subgenres or even other genres. So what I mean by that is within the story, you don't just have a fairly intricate house system and lore-heavy fantasy world, but you also have a murder mystery as a central part of the plot, as well as a trials plotline. The setup for the story is that you have this young woman named Nima, who is part of the House of Ravens. I'm saying house, they don't necessarily always categorize them in that way, but I think that's a very familiar way to categorize the breakdown of different groups within fantasy, so I'm referring to it as houses. So she's part of the House of Ravens, and the Ravens are individuals who are more known as scholars, people that are keeping track of events occurring now, as well as being very engrossed in what occurred in the past and trying to bridge the gap between those things, trying to discern truth from fiction. And she is somebody who absolutely loves her job. How she secured her job, though, has made it so that a lot of individuals sort of look down at her, don't really want anything to do with her, and also see her as incredibly selfish and ambitious. So Nima feels very much like an outcast. The reasons why she has this view towards her are things that you discover early on at the beginning, and I don't want to reveal too much about that because how all that unfolds leads to an additional mystery within the story as to whether or not the events that you came to know at the beginning happened the way you think they did, or if there's more to it. So I don't want to reveal too much about that, but the main bulk of the story is following Nima after one of the contenders to become the next emperor who was going to enter into these trials. One of the contenders has been found dead, and Nima is both put in charge of trying to investigate who is responsible for this individual's murder, as well as now being selected to replace that individual and participate in the trials, even though she does not have any desire to ascend to the throne. And on top of all of this, Nima also isn't sure if maybe she was the one that was the actual murderer, because she does not have any recollection really of certain events that transpired the night before the murder. So she has extra incentive to try and determine what happened and who was responsible, and she has no clue whether it was her or not. The trials component, the way it works is because there's different houses. For example, you have where she's from, the House of the Raven. Then you have foxes, you have the hounds, you have all these different groups, the tigers, and they each have a representative of their house, and they compete in these trials, and then whoever wins the trial will become either the next emperor or empress. And she really doesn't. Nima does not really want anything to do with this, but she has no choice to enter into this. And you are just having one thing after the next unfold. You're trying to figure out some of the pieces of what happened at the beginning of the story. You're trying to figure out truth from fiction of events that happened in the past, and it kind of invites you to do so through Nima's scholarly perspective. You also are getting other perspectives mixed in, sometimes from other contenders, sometimes from these mysterious forces that you are trying to determine, is this one of the gods? I think this might be one of the gods, because every now and then you get this almost omniscient perspective, and it leads you to believe that perhaps some of their lore that Nima doesn't really believe in is more real than you thought. And this comes into the picture based off of the fact that within not just the houses, there are also beliefs that these various different animal entities or creatures, that they were actually real godlike beings, and that they do not want there to be this bridge broken where the gods would return. And the gods, it would seem, don't really want this either, because it would mean something essentially apocalyptic occurring for all of parties involved. And so the way that this would come about is if this particular dagger is used to kill somebody, and this happens to be the murder weapon within the murder of one of the contenders. So now there's also the questions of, are we about to face the end of the world? Are the gods going to return? And then you're seeing how all of those pieces converge. I really, really liked the lore of this story. I liked the pieces of the world building. I felt like the way the author utilized the different perspectives, especially in regards to the more magical components to the story, or more lore, myth-based components, I'll say. I liked the way that that was incorporated in. The thing that made it so that, unfortunately, this didn't actually work for me, even though I liked so many of the pieces of it, and I liked the genre bender hybrid that this book was, the reason this didn't exactly work for me is that I did find the tone to be a little too young. And I do want to make note that I think there's a difference between young in the sense that you have something where it's literally young adults and it is youthful, it's centering stories that are more so rooted in what it's like to be a certain age. So 12 to 18 is the target demographic for young adult books. I think that's youthful. I'm trying to use young to be a little bit more polite, but I would actually say that this is more juvenile, and I think there's a difference between youthful and juvenile, and unfortunately I thought the tone of this was a little juvenile. However, because I think that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, I want to really make clear what I mean by juvenile, because I don't think that this is going to dissuade a lot of people. I also don't think it's going to not work for a lot of people. I think people are going to find the tone to be perfectly fine. It's specific to the characters, and the characters are all either late 20s, early 30s, and I just felt like they behaved in a way that was somewhat immature. But I wouldn't say that the writing itself is overly simplistic or that the writing itself is exceptionally casual, because some writing in certain stories feels more like text exchanges, and I know for some people that's fine, and for some people it doesn't really work. But regardless, I wouldn't describe the writing in that way. I just think that the way the characters behaved, and the way they spoke, and the way they saw things, and the way they utilized their time, and those sorts of things, it just felt kind of juvenile. Again, I'll go ahead and say juvenile. I'm trying to avoid saying young, because I think that that has a different implication. But as a result of the tone of the characters feeling that way, that's kind of what kept it from working for me. And there's a particular part that is not spoilery whatsoever. If you saw my in-depth review, I read this part in it, but I feel like this captures what I'm trying to describe. And I feel like this one passage maybe gives an indication of what I mean by the way like the characters think. It's not first person, but when you are switching perspectives, it is sometimes more of a close third person. It depends. There's a couple times where we head hop, actually, which I didn't love. And it was outside of the more omniscient, godlike character perspectives that you get. Outside of that, sometimes you head hop. But I'm not really referring to that. I'm referring more so to when we utilize third person and it's close third person. Thus, even though it's not I as the way that things are described, and you still have this connection to the characters, it still feels like it's rooted in their perspectives. So there's a part where you're following this character named Cain, and it says Cain had to admit she looked hot. They both did. Ravenna was like an evil butterfly, and Ruko was like a big sexy wardrobe that might kill you. And these were both very much Cain's type. Cain had a lot of types. So that right there is an example of what I mean by the tone and the fact that I'm like, how old are you again? So that's what I mean. And if you heard that and you're like, that's fine, then check out this book, because that's really the main thing that kept me from really, really liking it. I liked all the other concepts that were present, and if all of the other things I mentioned sound good, and that didn't sound frustrating to you whatsoever, or that wasn't something that would dissuade you, then don't let it. Definitely check out the book. But I do feel like that wasn't exactly the tone that I was expecting based off of the synopsis of this book, and I would say based off of the beginning, because I don't think the beginning reads in that way. So if you've read a sample online or something like that, I do think that it starts to lean into that tone more and more as you progress through the story. The last thing I want to highlight with this is the fact that there is such a prominent mystery component, and there's multiple, I would say, mystery components, and then there's things you didn't even realize were mysteries that present themselves as we're trying to figure out the other mysteries. And I liked all of that. However, I felt like Nima, following her as she's trying to figure things out, was a little irksome, because she, in my opinion, wasn't as bright as I wanted her to be in certain situations. I think I just wanted her to be less dense. She was kind of dense. And the reason that this is important to me in regards to this story specifically is because of the mystery component. I want to feel like, well, then what is it? I want to feel like they're pursuing everything that we as the reader would pursue also, and yet we still can't figure it out, because then it really makes you feel like more in the dark. And I was complimenting that there are some moments in this that are really shocking. And so I felt like if we had covered all the ground that most people would think of right away, it would have made those things even more impactful. But it's like you made your character so... she's just not very... she just doesn't notice stuff. It's still got a lot to it that I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy, and I think already a lot of people have really enjoyed this story. I thought the world was fascinating. I really liked the blend of different trends and subgenres. I thought it made it stand out. It made it more unique. I'm excited to see what other things this author does. I'm excited for what this might mean for the fantasy genre because of how well loved this has been. It kind of signals to, hopefully, publishers like, hey, we like when stories do interesting and unique things, or they combine things that are familiar in ways that we haven't seen all that much of before. So I'm excited for the impact hopefully this will have, and I'm excited for all the people that have really loved it. Just the tone and Nima as our protagonist, they didn't quite work for me. But hopefully, if you pick it up, it'll work for you. After that, we have Hemlock and Silver. This is by T. Kingfisher. I am a very big T. Kingfisher fan, even though there are some that definitely are more standouts to me than others. I've never come away from a T. Kingfisher book absolutely despising it, hating it, feeling like it was a waste of time. I've never had that experience. That's still true. This has not changed that. I did not come away from this absolutely hating it. I enjoyed my time reading it. It's not my favorite T. Kingfisher, though. And I'll get into the specifics as to why, but there is a lot about this that I still found very fun. This would be a great one to pick up for the fall. The setup for the story is that you follow this woman who, from the time that she was young and her cousin passed away, based off of ingesting something that turned out to be poisonous, since then she has developed this fascination with poison and wanting to be able to do what she can to find antidotes to said poisons. And so as a result, our character is somebody who has kind of gone down this path and become very capable in this area. And that draws the attention of the king, who believes that his daughter is being poisoned. However, he not only can't determine who is potentially poisoning her or what the poison is, but he also isn't really able to trust anybody because he feels like everywhere he looks, there might be somebody actually wanting the princess to be killed. And so he recruits our protagonist because he figures she's kind of, to put it bluntly, a nobody. And she didn't even know a lot of what was transpiring politically. And he's heard about her before through somebody else. Her father specifically has kind of put in his ear, my daughter is a really capable person when it comes to poison. She's brilliant and she's healed so many people. And so he figures, let me try to recruit her to see if she can figure out what's going on with my daughter. And then when our character arrives, it turns out that not only is this way over her head, and even though she loves a good problem to solve, she not only is frustrated by the fact that it would seem this is above her pay grade, we'll say, but also she's put in danger because if anybody finds out that she is trying to do what she can to help what would seem to be the poisoned princess, they might try to come after her because they're afraid she would thwart their plans. So now she's in danger in that sense. And then also perhaps there's more than just the typical ways in which a person would be poisoned at play. And so you're kind of discovering all of that as it goes along. I do continue to think that T. Kingfisher's experience, having written in so many different genres, has proven true with this again, because there are components to this that are funny. There's components to this that are pretty, honestly, even though it's a really short book, compelling world-building details that I really liked. She took the time to make this character feel like a believable character. It's written in a way that's somewhat casual, so I do think it's a very approachable, good entry into fantasy if somebody's not typically that involved in the genre. There's a lot to it that I think is really done well. There are also pieces to it that feel like they have mystery, thriller, horror components, and I like all that also. I do think this was the first time, it's not a particularly long book. This is the first time, I think, in a T. Kingfisher story that I have felt like maybe I'll call them character-isms, were overdone a little bit, because I really like T. Kingfisher's humor. I feel like it's somewhat snarky, and sometimes the characters have this sort of self-deprecating feel to them, or sometimes just the way that they analyze their environments is funny. So I feel like an example that happens right at the beginning of the story is that our character is a taller woman, and the king is a little bit shorter than her. She thinks he's probably about like an inch shorter. And she thinks of it somewhat as, she says something to the extent of that inch difference felt somehow anti-monarchist, something like that. And that's a really funny way to describe this simple, you could have just said the king was a little shorter than her, but the fact that she writes it in that way, it feels very connected to the character. It, I think, pretty quickly endears you to the character also, because there is this certain level of how the character thinks that in and of itself is amusing. However, I do feel like we leaned into that, I think, a little too much in this story, so this is a very, very basic example. But our character often is not the best at socializing, and when she's talking, she'll go like, and it'll actually be written out, ERR, or something to that extent, or like, UH. And it was that pretty often, to a point where I'm like, I get it. She's not the most eloquent. That's fine. I don't know if we need to write it out all the time. And it was that kind of thing. That's one specific example. But other ways in which the character is represented to you, I thought we repeated a little too often. And I think this actually speaks to a bigger topic that a lot of reviewers and a lot of fans of books in general, and fantasy specifically, have been touching on, which is the kind of editing that we've been seeing as of late with a lot of prominent names in the genre. T. Kingfisher, I think for a long time, was an underhyped author, and then I'm so excited because I think she deserves more hype, and I think she's getting it, and she's just putting out so many books. I think some of them were books she'd written before that are actually finally getting published, so I don't know the details of this, and it's not that relevant. But the point is, I think that T. Kingfisher is starting to become almost like a household name within fantasy and maybe horror, and that's really, really exciting. But I do wonder, and maybe it's just that I noticed it more in this book, maybe it was just specific to this book and was meant to represent this character, but I do wonder if it's because of the fact that she's becoming more of a household name, because she does have fans like myself. When there's a new T. Kingfisher book, I am going to, I call it more like they're an auto intrigue author, not necessarily auto buy, because sometimes if a book doesn't sound like anything I'd be interested in, then no amount of me liking an author is going to make me pick certain things up. But she's pretty much an auto intrigue author for me. And sometimes it feels like publishing knows, and I don't mean to be all conspiracy minded or anything like that, but sometimes it feels like publishing knows when, okay, this author has proven themselves to us and to their fans, so maybe we don't have to put quite as much into the editing. And I think we see conversations about this with big names like Sarah J. Maas and Brandon Sanderson, and I recognize that T. Kingfisher is not that popular, but I still wonder. And maybe it's nothing. I mean, I don't think it was the most egregious necessarily, but I did think that it felt at times like we were leaning a little too much. And it could just be that it's a little bit shorter of a book too, so it was just kind of, the frequency of it was more noticeable because this is roughly 350 pages. I'm making it sound like it's this really unignorable thing present within the book. It's not necessarily. I still really had fun with the book. I still really liked the main character as a character. I liked the way the plot unfolded. I thought it was creative and unique, and it felt like a dark fairy tale, and also was funny because she is funny. So I felt like there was a lot that I really, really enjoyed about that. It was just that one thing about it. It's probably what kept this from being as liked as something like A Sorceress Comes to Call. For me, I thought that was one of T. Kingfisher's best, and this one to me just maybe wasn't personally, I think, quite on that level. However, I still really enjoyed this. I feel like I probably spent too much time. Apologies. I feel like I spent too much time on that one detail about it. It was fun. It was a fun book to just pick up, and I think really fitting for the fall season if you are a seasonal mood reader. Last for today, we have Soul of Shadow. The story kicks off when a young high schooler goes missing, and one of his classmates and our protagonist, Charlie, finds that she can't seem to keep away. She's just really sucked into all the information surrounding this disappearance. And things get even stranger when there is a new student at her school, Elias, and it seems that not only is Elias also just as fascinated by this disappearance as she is, but also perhaps Elias has more information about it than anyone else. And the story very much feels like the CW type of shows I think a lot of us have seen in the past. If you've never seen the CW, it has a very particular kind of camp factor, and this story 100%, that's what it reminded me of. It's not necessarily the kind of camp I'm looking for in my stories. I don't mind the occasional camp, but this one I think really leaned into it, and I actually think there's something to stories that do that in a way that feels somewhat tied to the spooky season or some kind of paranormal. I think that that combination actually can work really, really well, and so I could see a lot of people having a lot of fun with this one. I don't think it necessarily took itself too seriously, and on top of everything, typically when we find that there's some kind of paranormal or there's some kind of blending between fantasy and modern day, I've found at least that a lot of times this, in young adult and adult fantasy at least, seems to be centered more so on something like vampires, those kinds of creatures. Whereas this one is actually tying into the story Norse mythology. So I haven't really seen too many Norse mythology and modern day type of hybrids. The closest thing I can think of, and it's not necessarily Norse, but it makes me think of Percy Jackson a little bit, where you have this modern day and then it's revealed to you that actually a lot of these myths are true. It has a little bit of that feeling. So it's not really portal fantasy, and it's not paranormal in the sense that there's vampires and werewolves in the way that we traditionally think of paranormal, but it has a lot of the makings of the feelings that you get from those kinds of stories. But it was very much over the top. I do think that there were certain parts of the story, specifically in reference to the fact that our main character's sister, her twin sister, had died a few years previously, that we are sort of tapping into the grief and the monotony of you're just kind of trying to go about your day-to-day life, and you maybe don't seem the same to all of your friends, but everybody's trying to just let you breathe, essentially. But how you are handling grief is very different from your other family members, and in some ways it can bring you closer, and in other ways seems to pull you apart, and you're just trying to go back to how things were, but also things are never going to be the same. So I definitely think there were certain pieces of the story that were trying to tie in certain elements that were a little bit more character focused, and also were trying to ensure that there was additional depth and it wasn't just pure camp and just pure fun. But I really think it leaned more into the camp and the fun, and it had those other elements to somewhat explain the characters and why they are the way they are and their motivations and their behaviors. It really is somewhat off the walls, and it's a lot of fun. It didn't necessarily work for me, though I do think that if you're somebody who, especially during spooky season, you just can't get enough of the fun camp, and if you were somebody that really enjoys the type of shows that were on the CW, then I could definitely see this one working for a lot of people. That's it though for some recent new fantasy releases. If you're interested in any of these, as always, I'll have them linked in the description bar, and if you'd like to elaborate on any of your personal thoughts about any of these, feel free to do so. I mentioned before, but I'll have my more in-depth review for the Raven Scholar linked as well, in case you'd like to see a little bit more specific thoughts on that. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.